Well, hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Williams, senior editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. We are back with another MGMA Insights Podcast, and I am so excited about this. We're joined today by Dr. Mimi Zieman, an OBGYN, an author, and an adventurer. Dr. Zieman's unique journey has taken her from New York City to the remote peaks of Mount Everest, as is chronicled in her new memoir, Tap Dancing on Everest. During this episode, we're going to talk about her experience in healthcare, also Everest and her book, and a lot more. So, Dr. Zieman, thank you for joining us on the MGMA podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. I'm very excited.
Yeah, you and I were talking right before we went live here. I was telling you I have this amazing view of the snow-peaked mountains of the Rockies, and you were telling me you've had a love for mountains and for the Rockies for quite some time. Tell us what kind of got that spark going initially.
Sure. I said that's not fair of you to say because the Rocky Mountains are my favorite place in the world. That's where I discovered my love of the mountains since I grew up a New York City girl, but happened to go to a high altitude field biology lab in Colorado during college. It was in Gothic, Colorado, which is just north of Crested Butte. And I spent 2 summers there, and it changed my life because it made me realize how much I love the mountains.
Yeah, I love that. My family and I moved here back in '08, so we've been here about 16 years now, if my math is holding up. It's not my strong suit, but we absolutely love it, and it's a good balance too, though, because I just got back from the beach for Thanksgiving, so it's kind of balancing the beach and the mountains, so that's always a good counterbalance there as well. So we're going to talk a lot about the mountains, but let's start with your healthcare career first. Talk about a little bit about that journey, whatever highlights you want to share, whether it starts here in the mountains, as you were talking about, or your medical career as well. Wherever you want to start, I'd love for you to paint that picture for our audience so we get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. My medical career started in New York City. I went to Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx and then did my OBGYN training at Columbia. Then I did a fellowship in family planning at UCSF in San Francisco and took my first job out of fellowship here in Atlanta, where I am now. Not at the same job, but I came to work at Emory and lead their family planning program. While I was there, typical academic career, and I started a fellowship, did research, education, and did that for about 10 years, and then decided to take that knowledge and skills and do it on my own as a consultant. So I became a bit of an entrepreneur, and I loved the next 10 years when that was my business because I got to continue to do research and teach and train. Did some contraceptive work in Africa, and other interesting things, a lot of writing still. I was an editor for UpToDate.com. And then it was sort of ready. I sort of decided to go back to employment, and I was a chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood Southeast. Then pivoted again to work at a startup as a VP of research and development. And then my final pivot was to creative writing.
Okay.
And now I do mostly writing, but work part-time again back at Planned Parenthood. I try to combine medicine and writing, so I've written a lot of op-eds on reproductive rights. I have a book called Managing Contraception. I'm a co-author, but I've done all 17 editions of it, and the new one just came out. I have a newsletter that combines medicine in the mountains called Medicine, Mountains, and More on Substack. And the other writing I've done is a play. I wrote the post-Roe monologues in the summer of 22 after the Dobbs decision. So
Wow.
a lot of pivots.
You have had a varied career. So to bring you up to speed, I don't know how familiar you are with MGMA, but we're the Medical Group Management Association, and our listeners are decision makers in medical practices, and they're looking at ways to, like a lot of businesses, increase revenue, lower cost, a lot of challenges with all the staffing issues that are going on and trying to tame everything in this new world of technology and what all's going on in the technological field of healthcare as well. And so it's just wanted to, bring you up to speed as to who the audience is and the kind of challenges that they find. And one of the things that really spoke to me when learning about your book, Tap Dancing on Everest, was really the inspirational side of that, because that's part of, running a business as well, making really big decisions and guiding and leading a lot of people and having a team, and really connected with that through your book as well. So let's go into that a little bit. Let's talk about the book, Tap Dancing on Everest. Love the title, first of all. So I love kind of digging into the origin of that. Where did the title come from? What's the origin of that?
The title changed over many drafts. At one point, it was called Unguided because my childhood as the daughter of immigrants was a bit unguided. I was left to my own with good and bad results. And we were unguided on the mountain because we had no Sherpa support, no use of oxygen. But Tap Dancing on Everest is a catchy title, so we went with it. But it sounds metaphorical, but it's based on an actual scene because I had also wanted to be a Broadway dancer, and I took my tap shoes to the mountain, and there's a scene where I did tap dance on Everest. And it's a scene, though, where I come into my own. I was the only woman on the team, and I was in the background in a supportive role as the medical person. So, the book is a lot about searching for your deeper self, your identity, who you want to be in the world. So that particular moment, I was fully myself.
I love that. So let's touch on some of that. So we just had someone else with a theater background on the show recently, and you had aspirations as a dancer. Or do you do any professional dancing, or have you had to set that aside with all the medical and the writing and everything else you've got going on?
I never was a professional dancer. As in high school, I danced every day and I loved it and I wanted to be a dancer.
Okay.
But so I kind of talk about it as like I didn't have the courage to take that risk. I didn't believe I could handle all the rejections of auditions and all that. And coming from, I mentioned an immigrant family that, struggled to make a living and a new life. I chose a more secure path,
Right.
medicine.
Right.
But I continued to do, I did promise myself I would always continue to dance, which I have done. And so that's why I danced on the mountain too.
Okay. Well, you have a very striking photo on the cover of the book. So tell us about that. How did that come about?
Yeah. So there's a lot of downtime on a mountaineering expedition, mostly when due to weather, which is out of your control.
Hmm.
We had incredible snowstorms on the east side of Everest in Tibet where we were. And we were living on a glacier. Our team was very small, just four climbers, a photographer, and me. I mentioned I was the only woman.
Hmm.
We were mostly at advanced base camp together. We had a cook and another helper at base camp. So the picture is one of our down days. The guys had wanted to go up the mountain, but it snowed and they came back down. It was like, what are we going to do now? So I got out my shoes and got up on a rock and started dancing. The picture, I'm not wearing my tap shoes. I got my mountain boots on, but
Good
it was the
idea.
same day.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I read
um,
John Krakauer's book about Into Thin Air about Everest. And so, yeah, that would be very brave to be wearing tap shoes there because the weather gets pretty extreme in those conditions. Did you have any issues with Weather, frostbite, anything along those lines?
Yes. So our so we were on the east face of Everest, which
Okay.
had only been climbed once before our team.
Okay.
The reason is it's a very steep part of Everest. It's very remote and it has a lot of avalanches. So we had a lot of snow and a lot of avalanche delays. And um, we did experience some trauma on the mountain. Um, and I did have to treat severe frostbite.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was the most extreme condition that I had to deal with.
Hmm. I want to get back to that in a moment, but I wanted to ask you about your father because he is a central character uh, in part of the book as well. So talk about his life and his role. I mean, in guiding you and being an inspiration to you. He was a Holocaust survivor, and please share anything you would want to about that as well.
Yeah, I didn't set out ever in my life to write about my family.
Hmm.
But the funny thing about the writing process is that you have to let it take you where it kind of wants to go. I thought when I finally sat down to write this book, I was just writing about my Everest story, which was an amazing experience. And then I started writing about my family. So my challenge was to weave them into my story. And my father's story is very sad and dramatic. He was the only survivor of the Holocaust from his family. He was born in Latvia. So his parents and siblings were all killed. And my mother, my grandmother had also been displaced. She had to leave Germany in 1933 when Hitler came to power. And she went to Palestine, which is where my mother was born, now Israel. And so the three of them came to the US and had big influences on me. My father took his experience and he wanted to help other people, so he became a psychotherapist. He was also very active in the community in civil rights and as a peace activist. And so he definitely influenced me to choose a profession that is also helping people, medicine. And a lot of what I do is advocacy for reproductive rights. And I watched him, go to meetings every night and paste leaflets on the traffic poles around New York. And it influenced me to, try to make a difference too in
Yeah,
my own way.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk about the expedition that took place. First of all, how did it come about, and what was your first interest in being part of the expedition, and then what was your role there as well?
Yeah, so it came about. I told you that I fell in love with the mountains as a college student.
Right.
And after I graduated, I decided to apply to medical school, but I also got this idea in my head that I wanted to go to the Himalayas. So I went alone at 22, backpacked, um, and spent some couple of months doing that. And towards the end of the trip, I met some climbers coming off of a failed Everest expedition
Hmm.
and became friends with a couple of them. And Robert Anderson immediately wanted to return and do another expedition. He had gotten very close to the summit. And I hadn't even started medical school, but I kind of said, well, if you need a doctor next time, you know, give me a ring.
Yeah.
Because he had told me it would take many, many years to get a permit to climb Everest. But because he decided to go to the East Face, which nobody wanted to climb, he got a permit quickly. And then I was invited a year after starting medical school. And I thought that that would be impossible because how would I take care of people in the wilderness? No chance for rescue. And so it was a very hard decision. The timing worked that we went when I had completed my third year of studies. So I spent about a year and a half studying wilderness medicine, high altitude medicine, and preparing. And my school let me go away, which surprised me. So a lot of the book, and this is the part that I think is empowering for other people, is that I was afraid of going there in my role. I was a medical student. I was full of self doubt. What if bad things happen? What would I do? There's no one I can call. Um, but I worked through a lot of the fear and decided to go. And I grew enormously from the experience. So I feel that sometimes in life, even when we're afraid, to not just throw those ideas out, but to think, what if I can do this? And what are the consequences if I don't? What am I missing out on? And to consider facing those fears, because we might not always be successful, but we will always grow if we face our fears and take on new challenges.
One of the themes that you talk about in the book is the healing power of nature and solitude. Talk about that. Talk about how that has transformed you and how you use it in your life and in your practice, throughout your career.
Well, it's really what drove me to the mountains. It's the feeling I have in the mountains, um, of connecting with the world, the bigger world around me. Um, and now we have studies that show that being outside and in nature really is good for us and makes us more connected and stronger and happier. For me, it makes me happier.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it is good advice and easy advice. In medicine, we look for easy things to tell people, right? Get outside for a few minutes, take a walk, or just sit there and listen and look
Hmm.
and smell and touch. And it brings you like a little sense of peace inside. For me, it does anyway. And with solitude, when I left for Nepal and trekked by myself, I met a lot of people, but what I grew from that experience is I had to rely on myself, and I was alone with myself a lot. And I found that I could connect to deeper parts of myself doing that again, like the facing fear thing. Um, and I think today, when we have the cell phones, and I'm guilty of this too, it's so easy to just pick it up and be entertained all the time and
Right.
distracted. Um, but people are so afraid of being bored, and they're so afraid of their thoughts and solitude. But again, it's sort of like the mindfulness training that
Hmm.
everyone's telling us to do. It's solitude, nature, being mindful, being present, um, has a wellness quality to it.
I've got a couple more questions for you that I want to ask. One of those is about the importance of facing the unknown. You were talking about facing fear. You were talking about overcoming obstacles that might be put in front of you. I mean, to put it into context, you were kind of a newbie, so to speak, in the medical field, still in, medical student when this first came about, this expedition, the planning of it. So you really did throw yourself out there in facing the unknown. What has that done in your career? You have already explained to us many of the things that you've already succeeded in, all these different categories of what you people would deem a career or a successful path there. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's allowed. I think it is like a muscle. If
Hmm.
you are get comfortable with change, with pivoting, with facing fear and feeling that insecurity, like if we just do what we always do, it's kind of a comfortable or secure feeling. Um, but it doesn't lead to anything very exciting or innovative, right?
Yeah.
But if we can change or pivot, um, anything's possible, right? And we don't know what it is because we're talking about uncertainty, but that's where big change happens and that's where we grow. So I think, for medical practice, for medical leaders to lean into uncertainty. You know, they have to embrace being adaptable and pivoting, right? And being open to learn new things, um, and listen to staff and the people around them, listen to feedback, listen to new opportunities. Of course, you need like a foundation of excellence. So there's a foundation of mastery before you can be open to anything, I think. But if you concentrate on that, then you might be ready for the next big thing. And I think medicine is notoriously slow to embrace change.
Yeah.
But I think good leadership isn't about having all the answers in the beginning, but recognizing that it's about guiding your team and finding answers together, and like I said, listening a lot,
Yeah.
respecting your staff, right? And hearing feedback. And it's funny because that connects a little bit to part of the reason I wrote the book too, because I wanted to highlight the story of someone who's in the background and not always listened to. Like, we know the mountaineer stories are fascinating, and that's
Hmm.
what's typical in mountaineer. But what about the doctor story? Or what about the only woman on the team story? That's interesting. And I think everyone has a story, but that goes back to this question you asked me, because if we're talking about medical leadership, everyone should have a voice too.
Yeah. Uh, Last question then. You've tap danced on Everest. So what's next on the horizon? What is going on in your world right now, and what do you want to share with us about that?
So right now, honestly, I'm doing a lot of events related to my book.
Okay.
And that's been fascinating because I get to hear what readers think and connect with them and hear their stories. Um, I think I mentioned I wrote a play.
Hmm.
So I kind of need to get back to that. It was put on in several cities, but I put it in a drawer about a year ago when I was focusing more on the book. But sort of like the advice I've been giving, I want to just be open to. I'm at a point right now where I'm open to inspiration. If I have another good idea to write, or other opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Dr. Zieman, thank you so much for joining us on the MGMA podcast. Best wishes on your book tour as you continue to explore that and talk to people about it and in all your endeavors. So thank you so much for sharing this.
Thanks, Danielle. I really appreciate you having me and learning more about MGMA and everything you're doing.
Yeah. If anybody is interested in the book, where would they go to find that then?
It's at all the major online retailers,
Okay.
and you can ask your library to order it or your local bookshop because it's great to support local bookshops. It's available for all of them to stock or order too.
All right. Well, that is wonderful. So, everybody, that is going to conclude this particular episode of MGMA's podcast. But we will, in the episode show notes, we will put direct links so you can just click right through to find Tap Dancing on Everest. So, thank you so much for being MGMA podcast listeners.